Welcome back to part 3 of Interview with the Old Mage. In this episode, we do continue talking about the realms, LGBTQ, characters in the realms, industry standards, and a few projects that Ed has in the works, which should be coming out. I think he's posted a few of them on the Fans of Ed Greenwood page. So without further ado, here's Ed Greenwood.
Are there any other authors' characters that are no longer written about that you wish you could take up the mantle of and continue?
Yes and no. And the reason I say no is because I'd want those authors to continue with.
No, absolutely. But I mean, if you could make a choice, and like, is there any particular character that fascinated you to the point where you're like, oh, I'd love to have a chance to write more about that person?
Oh, the whole gang that Farida and all of her friends that Aaron introduced were Brimstone Angels.
Right.
You know, I'd love to find out what happens to them.
Yeah, really.
And there are many other characters but of course it's mainly the roster of my own that I have introduced but never gotten the chance to tell the stories of. Illustrial, Laeral, there's so many of them. Various of Elminster's apprentices. I want to find out about the new Blackstaff, Vajra. More. I would be even happier to sit back and read new Stephen Shen novels.
No, exactly.
But if I can't have them, I would want to see, okay, is Kelvin really gone? How does this affect it? And what does Vajra get up to? All that stuff. I mean, that's the whole point. If I can't do it, I want other people to do it for preference. I want to see the original authors do their thing. I don't want to write new Erlen and Daniel and stuff. I want Elaine to be pumping them out so I can read them.
Well, she knows them better.
Yeah. And but failing that, yes, I'd like to. Now, on the other hand, I respect an author's wishes. If Bob tells me I don't want anyone else writing Tryst books, okay, I respect that. We might have some hairy scenes if we're writing around him. Why isn't Drizzt here? But that's the same sort of problem they have in Marvel Comics. If you're attacking New York, why is Spider-Man defending it? What happened to the Fantastic Four? Are they all away? How about the Avengers? It's that problem. So we would have to work around why doesn't Drizzt respond? But then all it might take is he's off doing this, or so it's rumored. And to take care of it. But I mean, for instance, and I'm just giving this as a hypothetical situation, if Bob said to me, I don't want anyone else writing Drizzt books, then right, nobody else writes Drizzt books. Now, it's different for the copyright holder in this particular case because they are a large company that is looking to keep this property in print to make money and therefore constant new projects. They might say, no, we're going to carry on with that character regardless. But for me as a creator, my personal thing would be, no, if somebody doesn't want anybody else writing their stuff, that's fine. But by the flip side, don't pick up characters that I wrote and put on the scene, like in the case of Elaine, when she's introducing Erlen and Danilo, she's having them come into contact with Elaith Kralnober, the Serpent, a character I created for Waterdeep.
Right.
And I don't want somebody to say, well, because Elaine wrote about Elaith, you can't. You see, that's not fair either, because what you're doing is taking the big cast of shared characters and saying, these are mine, you can't play with them. It sort of ruins the whole concept of a shared world. And then you end up with the shared world as a setting in which people are writing series side by side that never have contact with each other.
Right.
And that feels weird too. Even if they don't do crossovers directly, there should be, what happens in one book should be mentioned or reflect or affect the other books. Just, as News of the World does in the real life. If there's a world war going on, it affects everybody. If Krakatoa is erupting over there, it affects everybody.
Right.
If there's a famine in this place and you have starving, desperate people as refugees going elsewhere, that should be reflected in the next book, so that the place feels real and feels cohesive. But from my point of view, there are many characters I'd like to pick up and see more of, just because I want to see more of them. And the other thing is, in too many of our novels, too many fascinating characters don't make it to the end of the novel. The body counts are high.
Right, they really are.
Yeah. So I would like to. I want to find out their story before that. You know, it's the old thing of, yeah, it's sort of anticlimactic to write an Admiral Akbar Star Wars novel because we know what happens to Admiral Akbar, we know the fate. But on the other hand, how do we get to it's a trap? You know,
well, exactly.
How do we get to what's his backstory? You know, and look, for instance, if you look at the first Indiana Jones movie, he has this rivalry going with Belloc. Well, show me some past exploits of Belloc.
Right.
You know,
why is he such an ass? You know.
Yeah, and but they've been going at it with each other for years as rivals, which means Belloc's had some successes before the one we see on the screen.
Right.
So I want to see some of those, and they've shaped him just as, you know, everybody's been shaped. Denholm Elliott, we see briefly on the screen as a professorial colleague of Indy. You know, the two FBI agents come to talk to him, and they both know about the Ark of the Covenant. And, okay, what else does Denholm Elliott know about? This guy's fascinating. He may not be the action hero that Indy is, but he's obviously gotten around.
Right.
And he knows all these same people. You know, and that person dropped out of sight. Well, if they dropped out of sight, then obviously he knew him, was keeping tabs on him. So and of course, there are things that you could never explore, and there are things you don't need to explore. They're just there from the needs of the narrative. But the whole point of making the world, the setting, your fantasy, imaginary setting as rich as possible is if people fall in love with it, they want to know all this stuff, which is why there are people pestering George Railroad Martin about, you know, Westeros. There's been an entire industry built up around Professor Tolkien's Middle Earth and wanting to know more and more about it. Same thing with Star Trek, same thing with Star Wars. Any setting we fall in love with, people want to know more about it. They want to make it their own, and one of the ways they make it their own is telling their own stories set in it.
Right. No, that makes absolute sense. Now, you said something a few minutes ago about crossover. Do you think the Realms will ever or would make a good crossover with any of the other settings like Dark Sun, Spelljammer, Ravenloft, Dragonlance, Birthright?
Well, two of the settings are tailor-made to crossover, Spelljammer and Planescape. I mean, they're meant to be crossroads settings that link the other settings.
Right.
And Ravenloft has always been posited as in the nebulous, misty way, the same thing. You know, you could pass from setting to setting into and out of Ravenloft with great difficulty. And of course, that was when Ravenloft was first created. One of the things Jeff asked me to do is come up with a whole bunch of characters who've gone missing in the realms, who could now be in Ravenloft. Gone to Gold the Lost King was the only one they developed. But I wrote up a huge write-up for all these characters. And it was like, from the beginning, there were going to be various domains, demiplanes, you know, that ruled by various rulers in the mists, and people were going to come and go. And time could move at a different rate, and this is how you could have a character who would otherwise die of old age. You could just take them away and have them come back a century later. They'd been off somewhere in the mists or whatever. And you could do the same thing with plane walking characters. And because I had been very interested in the concept of planes, and, you know, wrote my first big Dragon article back in Dragon 37 that was about gates in D&D and going between various planes. And I was referencing Roger Zelazny's Amber series. I was referencing Philip Jose Farmer's World of Tears. I was referencing William Morris's The Wood Beyond the World, and all of the stuff that from fantasy that toyed with the ideas, different linked worlds. And so from when Jeff Grubb was first started working on the first manual of the planes, we talked back and forth because I'd done the 9 Hells for Dragon. He knew I was into this, and I had an idea of how the realms fit in its multiverse, you know, and so on. So we spitballed ideas for Manual of the Planes, the first Manual of the Planes, and this the rewrite too, the second one, and that was just great fun. It was like, hey, what if, you know, and I love doing that. And I thought from the very beginning that a high-level campaign in D&D, when your characters were getting up to 20th level, in other words, where in the early editions of the game was broken, in that,
Right.
in that the rules were no longer easily handling more powerful characters. You would go plane walking. You would fight these weird and wonderful things in settings that were hostile to you as a life form because they were so different. And that there would be a cabal or several cabals of mind flayers, beholders, or sinister merchants who already controlled the gates between the realms to make money for themselves. And they didn't want you using the gates without their permission. In other words, borrowing all that from World of Tears, from Farmer. And that's what you would do in a high-level D&D campaign. And to do that, you have to work out all the rules for all the planes and all the little pitfalls and how it affects your breathing and your weight and everything, and all the little weird monsters and what would happen to a parasitic monster from an outer plane if it glommed onto your body and then traveled through a gate to you back to the realms. What happens to the parasite? Does it flourish? Does it wither? What happens? Does it suddenly have weird powers here that it didn't have there? All that stuff needed to be worked out. Of course, that's another can of worms we'll never have time for in our lives. But that was another thing I wanted to do. It was like a high-level campaign. And of course, what happened instead is Planescape became its own setting.
Mm-hmm.
Because TSR had gotten the idea that new worlds sell, as opposed to, when you look at Ravenloft, it's really a style of play, a gothic style of play, more than it is a coherent setting at the beginning, anyway.
Right.
It's like, make up your own demi-planes. They're all floating in the mist. They can be anything creepy and weird you want. So borrow anything from a horror movie that lights your fire and put it in Ravenloft. There you go. Yours will be different from everybody else's, and nobody knows where they're going, and there's no maps, and they'll be scared shitless because they can't get home. But it's a style of play almost more than and it's like, that's fine, that's one choice, but I wouldn't have fit with my home Realms campaign players because they all had busy, hard lives. They didn't want their play sessions to be worse than their real life.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I knew it wouldn't have flown with them. But I mean, that's the thing. The crossovers work if they will work for your band of players. In the party, if they want to do it, if they want to meet Modrons, fine. If they want to fight dinosaurs, fine. But there are other gamers who would say, I do not want dinosaurs in my fantasy world, or no way we're using those stupid Modrons. See.
If you want dinosaurs, just go down to Chult.
Yeah, well, you see, there's the thing. It's what lights your fire. And the whole point of publishing the Realms the way we published it is, from the very beginning, it was acquired by TSR in order to have a unified game world for the second edition of the game. But what that meant was, in Jeff's original position paper, is Arabian Adventures, which got published, as El Khadim. Oriental Adventures, which got published as Oriental Adventures.
Right.
Pirate Adventures, which became Pirates of the Fallen Stars. Jungle Adventures, which became Malatra, the Living Jungle. You see, there was it was to accommodate all sorts of styles of play. We're putting the smorgasbord, putting the buffet in front of you, so you can pick and choose what you want to do at your gaming table, and so that it isn't one note. You see, at the beginning, I was afraid Darkstone was one note because it was survivalist at the beginning. It wasn't until we got to that Oasis adventure where you actually had something that had water and food and healing. Up until then it was fight for the scarce resources. As gladiators, wow, fight each other. It's like, okay. It's fine, and it's different from the Realms, which is what it was designed to be, but it wasn't lighting my fire. It wasn't what I wanted to do as a gamer. If I wanted survivalist, I've got Gamma World in front of me.
Right, exactly. That's true. I mean, like for me, we started playing in Greyhawk because that's what was around. So we started in Greyhawk and then used my wild magic to transport us to the Realms. So that's how we did it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with doing that, and there's nothing wrong with using magic and gates or whatever it is to briefly bop you into any fantasy setting from any movie, novel, TV series, anything that lights your fire.
Right.
I mean, I would love to walk the streets of Ankh-Morpork in Discworld. I don't know if I'd want to ever go anywhere near the Unseen University, mind you. But I mean, I would love to. But that's the thing. It's choices. If you place the choices in front of people, and then I frankly don't want to be there right now during the Game of Thrones because it's too dangerous.
Everybody dies.
Yeah, but I don't mind watching it.
Yeah, no, I don't either. But yeah, I wouldn't.
Yeah, you see what I mean?
There.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be there if I can just watch it safely from this distance.
Oh yes. Oh, I know what you're talking about. I wish I could walk walk up in the tree, the tree trails that go through Lothlorien.
Yeah.
How beautiful would that be? No, I agree with you 100%. But I do walk that in my mind when I read the books. So.
Yeah, and of course, a good writer can take you to transport you, and describe them so vividly that you can feel it as if you are there.
Right. No, exactly. And that's and truthfully, that's what your writing does for me, I have to say.
Gosh.
Oh. I do have another question, and we kind of touched on this a little bit on the first podcast about Elminster and where his, where he was kind of modeled after, and you said it was Merlin the Magician and some other things. So, like when people meet you, the first thing, they figure that you're or Elminster is a personification of you. Okay. Well. And probably because you have played his character at cons before.
Yes.
But what about the other characters? Like, I know that Storm, I think you said may have been of NPC, but like Selune or Kelvin. Were these iconic characters that you wrote about initially? Were they modeled after real people, kind of like remember Leo?
Mm-hmm. No, none of them were consciously modeled on real people by me originally. Remember, I was a 5-year-old shy kid with glasses when I created Elminster. I did not have a beard. I was,
Are you sure?
Yeah, sure. But when it became a shared world, other people at work in the realms either wanted to know what a character was, and I would give them a shorthand. Like, Kelvin? Kelvin is James T. Kirk, or the Starship Enterprise. Or with
the beard.
or Jeff, when he was writing the comics, he modeled Leo's looks on War Inspector, who was one of his bosses at TSR at the time. But that wasn't something that I did originally, and I tried not to model anybody on specific real-world people. The one time I think we've really stepped over the line in the realms is when somebody wrote the Dalai Lama into the realms. No, that's a real person. Do not do that.
Right.
It's a title, yes. I mean, it can be a succession of real people, but don't do it. But inevitably, other people that work in the realms, and gamers play this game right now. It's a game I dislike because I don't think it works very well. But they say, oh, so was copied from this place and Tether was copied from that. But no, none of them were. I do not want real-world analogs. But from the beginning, other people that work in the realms, in attempt to understand the realms, have modeled it on real-world analogs, or, in the case of Doug Niles and Zeb Cook, because they were ex-history teachers, and were intensely interested in history and historical warfare and so on, they would put things that were modeled on real-world things, like the Mongol horde.
Right. Oh, who could that be?
Yeah, into the realms directly. And it's like, and this was part of TSR's plan from the realms in the beginning, that, we have, Oriental adventures. Okay, you have to have an Oriental part, sort of thing. They want to have Vikings, they want to have pirates, but from my point of view, I didn't want my realms to be too real-worldish, too much like the real world, because people stop role-playing and they stop thinking, oh, it could be anything, what's around the next corner, and then they start thinking, oh, well, in real life, the stirrup was invented in this thing, so they won't have stirrups.
Right.
And let's see the broadsword, and then they start reaching back through history, or even worse, Hollywood history, and they stop role-playing and start thinking in terms of what they will find based on a real-world analog, or a mistaken real-world analog that Hollywood's handed them. which I really don't want. To me, for my own gaming and for my own design, no, I want the realms to be itself, because then you're always you're watching and listening or playing and wondering what's going to hit you next. No, I wonder what's going to happen next.
Exactly.
Because you're not using any preconceived notions. That's my preference. Because, see, at the beginning, when I was a 5-year-old kid, I'm writing the realms for me, not for anybody else. They're for me. And no, they're not my wish fulfillment. I'm not seeing myself in the realms. I'm not seeing me as the action hero, because if you'd met the 5-year-old me, who was almost 6 feet tall,
oh my God,
it's thin as a rake. You could count all my ribs. My hip, I went in below the rib cage and out at the hip bones, and I was shy. I was clumsy. I was unathletic. I already was, you're a nerd,
Right.
I was not seeing myself as the action hero. I was not trying to overcome that. I was wanting to explore fantasy worlds in my mind, So it wasn't wish fulfillment. And people who say, "Oh yeah, all the characters are married," says, "No." But some of them have become that way for novel needs of the time. But they're not at all what I would have been writing about left to my own. I would be writing stories of real people living gritty lives in a world that magic happens to work, and there are dragons, and there are kings in a feudal system, and there are weird monsters wandering around, and how that affects you. And you are dealing with different races, elves, dwarves, and crazier ones too.
Well, no, absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, for me, I don't expect every book I read to be the great American novel when I read it. But, I have pretty low expectations, I guess you might say, because when I go in and read a book, if it takes me out of the real world and I'm not thinking about politics or healthcare or famine or who's going to invade who next week, and I forget about that for the time that I'm reading, I think it's done its job. And I kind of go at movies the same way.
Mm-hmm. Me too. And I also find books fascinating that take you back to another time. Like if I'm reading a murder mystery that was written during the Second World War, and there's rationing and there were blackouts and so on, I don't mean one that's written now about that time. I mean one that was really written at that time.
Right.
And you get this feel of what it was like in a different time. And even sometimes if they're imaginary times, like P.G. Wodehouse, when he was writing about Bertie Wooster and all of these, the Blandings Castle books, that's almost a never version of Edwardian England. They were never quite that carefree and flippant and zany and so on. But I'd like to believe that it did once exist. It's fun,
right?
That sort of thing. And yeah, I'm the same way. I want the book to tell me an entertaining story and take me away from real life for a moment, just to be different. Not necessarily because my real life is horrible, although sometimes it is. But I mean, just to take. Because we don't have time in our modern society to just go and explore the world. Like, for one thing, there's border patrols. You can't. And for another thing, we don't have the time or money to just hop on a plane or have our own plane and say, "Oh, let's see what's over there."
Right.
And that can be very dangerous to try that. But you can be transported just by squiggles of shaped ink on a page to another time and place. And a time and place is imaginary, but what the heck? Let's go along for the ride. This is fun.
Well, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And at its best, it grabs you so much that you end up crying over something bad happening to a character who's completely imaginary.
No, exactly. What example is? I just binge watched Star Trek Discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And yes. Have you seen any of those?
Oh yes,
I have. I mean, I couldn't stop watching them. It was up till 3 a.m, and I have to get up at 3.
Yes.
And it's like I can't stop watching the show. And then when I got to the end, I was sad there wasn't any more. I'm waiting for the next one to come out now. But that's what I mean is I want to get lost. I don't want to think about politics. I don't want to think about presidents. I don't want to think about anything except what I'm reading. And I never get political about so many people get up in arms about the books, and if recently, to use a real world example, they'll get upset because an LGBTQ character showed up in a fantasy novel. But that's life, and I don't think about those things. Not that makes me unintelligent or not caring, but when I read the book, I just take it as part of the narrative, and I just go along with it.
That's right. If you're reading about the realms, and it's a D&D setting, you're reading about a world in which there are lizard men,
right,
or lizard folk. Now that we've politically corrected, updated them, where there are talking dragons that can shape change, and have sex with humans, and have offspring, half dragons, and so on. That's sort of, haven't we moved beyond LGBT and worrying about it, or obsessing, or getting upset about it? Haven't we moved beyond having humans of different skin colors when you've got elves and you've got orcs and yet of course we haven't, because we're all human. But right. It should broaden our horizons enough that we can look at these things in different ways. I have had gay male and lesbian female characters in the realms from the very beginning.
Right.
And there were certain people in-house on staff who wrote them out by changing genders and changing. And there were other people who thought, oh, there aren't enough females here. Let's change some of these males to females so we got a better balance. It's like, no, leave my male characters alone. Let's put in some of the female characters you've been jumping over and ignoring.
Right.
It's because they're there too, But and from the beginning, the realms did not have a male dominance and so on, because I didn't have it in my life. My dad was away for a lot of my childhood. He threw himself into his job in grief. My mom died when I was 6. I was raised by my grandma and the aunties. In a sort of succession, they sort of tag teamed. and therefore all the dominant people in my life telling me what to do and educating me and so on were women.
Right.
I've worked in public libraries since I was 14. Almost all of my bosses and coworkers have been women. This is what I'm used to. Right. So, I'm used to women being in positions of authority and being more than equal. And although there are certain professions, like, say, being a blacksmith, that require strength, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be all male blacksmiths, because if you are a woman and you've been helping at a forge since you're a young kid, yeah, you will have the strength if you're still at it at the time you're an adult,
right.
To do it too. And none of this was unusual to me, but the realm should both embrace real world issues and problems, so we don't ignore sexism and racism, we don't ignore gender politics, but at the same time, the realms isn't our real world. So the realms should have its own way of viewing and handling such things, which just accept things. In the realms from the beginning, I can remember this distinctly while writing Spellfire. I had scenes where men were embracing and kissing each other, not right. sexually. These were family members comforting each other and so on. It wasn't a sex thing, but an editor took it out. Oh, we can't have that. We can't have all that homoerotic stuff. Holy crap. Because, we want to sell into the Bible Belt. We're in the American Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
People don't write about this stuff. Well, excuse me, but the realms is different than real world modern America.
Right.
And it should be different. And what the hey? But of course, the needs of the publisher are different from the needs of me as a little kid writing the realms to please myself.
Right.
And when I was writing the realms to please myself, I wanted it to be different than our real world, and I didn't know what I wanted it to be, because I wanted to explore with each story and have different things. But just as if you read Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, big, strong, manly males, both human and elven, they cry all the time when things upset them. It's not unmanly to cry, and that's a cultural difference that sort of, say, a 1950s or 60s male in North America would go, no, men don't cry. It's a sign of weakness, sort of thing. And yet, Middle Earth is different. visibly different as you're reading it. And of course, I want the realms to be different, but the difference between the realms and Middle Earth or any other fantasy setting that is controlled and written about by one author is the realms is a shared world, so it reflects all the different values that people bring to it, and it has to be more broad and accepting than many settings, because all sorts of people from different backgrounds now, from different generations, are coming into the realms, exploring, finding it, discovering it for the first time, and making it their own. And they will tell different stories than people of other backgrounds and generations would tell. I mean, your typical gaming table now is far different from what it was when I was a kid. Because when I was a kid, there were no role-playing gaming tables. There were wargaming tables.
Right.
And they were almost exclusively men. And they were nerds. But they may have been manly men nerds as well. You know, pocket protectors, glasses, sometimes beards, usually a weight problem with a belly. You know, and a bunch of guys, and they were, you know, and they would play Napoleonic war games or Jutland, the Battle of Jutland, and naval war games, you know, and it was a militaristic thing. And there were not too many women at the table. From my original Realms gaming, there were always women as part of our gaming group. They were always equal to the men. There were never as many of them as I would have wanted. Only rarely did we have more women players sitting at the table than men. But there was no way that they were subservient. There was no way that they were there because they were someone's girlfriend. And there were no way that they were there to bring the snacks and shut up. No. This was... So when I see stuff happening now in the gaming community and so on, I'm thinking, oh, this is all... It's a different thing. And I also grew up in Canada. And I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood in Canada because it was a rich bedroom community in which executives from all over the world were posted to run their Canadian branch plants. So literally people with all skin colors, all cultures, all languages were the people I went to school with, the people who were my neighbors. I was used to all this. And I'm not American, so I don't have the American slavery and black and white conflict that's rooted in that. That wasn't part of my culture.
Right.
Black people were your neighbors. Yes, there are racists everywhere, including in our police forces here. You know, they're who will stop people and card them because they're black, because they're walking late at night. And it's like, yeah, but that's not my experience. So that didn't inform the realms as I was creating it.
Right. You know, I always wondered why there's so many fantastical things going on in the realms, and my thought was always, you have elves, you have dwarves, you have monsters, you have dragons, you have people riding dragons, you have liches, you have kingdoms, and all this stuff, and you find that one particular thing unacceptable.
Yeah, exactly. Really? Really?
That's one thing?
That's the hill you're going to die on?
Exactly. That's where you choose your fight? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I really, for right now, Ed, I got one more question. I got a couple things, other things I want to talk about. This is one from Curry. He had heard that one of Elminster's favorite foods was Leo's fried bread.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Where is Ed's favorite place to get fried bread in Canada and the U.S.?
Fried bread? I haven't got one. My favorite fried bread was the bread that Jenny used to fry.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in the skillet up at the cottage. As I get older, there are more and more things I'm developing food allergies to, and that upset my stomach and so on. So that I can't be as adventuresome as I was when I was a kid. You know, but I was one of those kids where, again, diverse backgrounds. You were always sampling something else. What's this? Snake. Snake? Tastes like chicken. No drumsticks. Yeah.
Well, this reminds me, my father was an airline pilot. He flew all over the world, and I was probably the only 6-year-old kid who was getting to eat frog legs and chocolate-covered ants and grasshoppers and things like this that he'd bring back from all over the world and say, these are a delicacy over in blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I would love to try, and that was me. I was trying everything. So there's in terms of fried bread, yeah, it's Jenny's fried bread.
There you go.
And I have been around the world, and the best fry bread that wasn't made by Jenny. The various bed and breakfasts all over Britain, where they serve you a breakfast that will, do your heart in a hurry, where everything is fried. Like for breakfast, you have fried sausages, you have fried eggs, you have fried tomatoes, you have fried bread. You don't have toast. You have fried lamb's kidneys. You have fried figs. They're all fried together. Everything's fried. I mean, to me, that's not as bad as Southern American cooking with the grits, with the grease on top. It's like, this is not food to me, because the grease hits me, and it's too much grease, and I start, throwing up right away because I can't take the grease.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
So, but yeah, that's where I've had marvelous fry bread all over the place. There was a bed and breakfast in Edinburgh. It was marvelous. I had one down in Cornwall. It was marvelous. Fried kippers, everything was fried, and there was all sorts of stuff, and good bubble and squeak with fried everything. Don't get me started. We're talking food, Jeff.
Well, I spent about a week in London back in September, and the breakfasts there were wonderful.
Yes. Just don't think about what it's doing to your body.
I just thought about how am I going to change this when I get back home?
Yes, yeah.
Well, there's a couple of things I want to talk about before we wrap this up here, and one of them is something that you just posted recently on the fan page. Creatures from Fairy Tales and Myth?
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell us about this?
Oh, okay. A friend of mine who lives in Quebec, called Andrew Volkauskas, has a role-playing game called Fate of the Nords. He is of Nordic heritage. This is a Nordic role-playing game, and it takes everything he can find, and he reads as much original sources as he can and tries to square away the often contradictory myths and legends about Dvergar and Draugr and Lingormir and all the Norse and Celtic and of the North monsters, and the Sidhe, lots of the Fae as they are, and there are also novels. Stephen Pearl, a Canadian novelist, writes novels set in this Fate of the Norns setting. And Fate of the Norns, first of all, the books are gorgeous, and like visually gorgeous, beautiful art underlaying the text, and Andrew did a beautiful illustrated Edda, which is not only a great work of scholarship, as in he rationalized various contradictory translations and so on, but it is also a beautiful book. But recently, he hit upon the idea of doing a bestiary, because he knew I'd written ecologies for the realms and so on. What if we take these monsters, and instead of just the monster write-ups that are already in his earlier Fate of the Norns rule books, we get together a cast of designers. So there's Michelle Franklin writing, there's James Kerr writing, there's Andrew writing, and there's me writing. And James Kerr is writing the myths and legends, like he's gathering from the already published lore little things about critters. These can see in the dark. These are afraid of gold. All stuff like that you can glean from the myths. And because Andrew is the owner and creator of the Fate of the Norns, he's deciding which version holds sway in his setting. Like if there's two contradictory stories where, they love gold, they hate gold, he will decide, for his setting. And then James wrote those sections, and then Michelle, Andrew, and I are all writing stories, sometimes from the point of view of the monsters, but more often from the point of view of a human who has an encounter with the monster. So we're bringing the monster alive. What do they look like? How do they talk to you, or do they talk to you? What do they smell like? What do they sound like? What will they try and do to you? So it's not just, fight the monster and kill them. It's making deals with monsters, getting tricked by monsters. What monsters will, for mutual benefit, will try and get you to do for them, will they do something for you. Bargains with, and it's all the things from, for instance, in Fate of the Norns, he's Andrew's pulled out from the legends. There's not just one sort of Valkyrie that takes the honored warrior dead to Valhalla.
Right.
There are Valkyries from all of these deities that take you to all various places, depending on how you died.
Really?
Yeah, things like that. And this creatures book has just gone off to the printers. It was a Kickstarter, but we all wrote stories. So I've been beavering away 20-something stories, more than that, writing little, and they're fairly short. We're talking like 1,500 words being sort of the upper limit for most of them. But it's sort of like a little window into the world of each monster. So when you read the book, it's like a whole bunch of little fairy tales about monsters, but not written for children. I don't mean that they're
really?
I don't mean that they're full of sex. I don't mean they're adult. I mean they're written. There's death. There's fighting. There's trickery. There's hard words. It's for. But I find the whole result of the book to be both beautifully gorgeous with the art and fascinating. It's one of those books where I would love, even if I never ever played Fate of the Norns as a game, I would love to have it on my shelf and pull it down and lose myself in it for a few minutes here and there in between novels novels I'm reading. So that's a product that is just about to drop, and I see the announcements are now out on Twitter, and I think everybody should take a look at it. Now, Andrew does the convention circuit.
Right.
He brings Pendelhaven, his company, to as a little booth to various conventions and sells Fate of the Norn stuff. So you can go and look and at the stuff and leaf through it and see how gorgeous it is. But to me, I don't know how often, if ever, I'm going to play Fate of the Norn's game, although it's a fascinating game, and he's worked some very interesting game mechanics in it that I would like to try out sometime. But I want to pore over the books just the same way that a lot of us buy, TSR and later on Wizards of the Coast D&D adventures, and we may never run them the way they're written, but we leaf through them and glean ideas from them and just enjoy them, And in the same way, I've been kept very busy these last few months working on this, and I love it. It's off to the printer now, so I'm on to the next thing. But
I'm looking at the pictures now from the Fate of the Norns on Facebook, and they are gorgeous books.
Yeah, this is just lovely. It's sort of like there are very talented people, and they sell them sometimes on Etsy and so on, who do mock medieval manuscripts or what purport to be fantasy grimoires with real spells in them, and they're just gorgeous. Well, this is that sort of class of book. It is so gorgeous you want to leaf through it over and over again. I'm
looking at it now, the Lords of the Ash cover.
Yes.
Oh, that's beautiful. Ragnarok.
Yep.
And there's Floki. Hey, how about that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So this is Andrew's game and Andrew's baby, and I love playing in other people's worlds. I just did a Rocket Age thing, which is a completely different. But I love doing this. I love sort of, and it was my pleasure to get to play in Middle Earth years ago for a computer game. I like stepping into other worlds, other people's, because it's fun. It's doing something different. But I never want to leave the realms for too long because I'm working on that every day. But yeah, this is a project I just finished doing, and I've got a whole pile of other projects coming up. But this is one that I really think that people who love gorgeous books, and people who love Norse mythology and all things Norse, and people who love myths and legends, and gamers should all take a look at.
No, absolutely. What about Ancient Domains of Mystery?
What about Ancient Domains of Mystery? The other project, yes.
Right, the other project. I mean, talk a little bit about that, because that looks really interesting. Is that still in Kickstarter?
Yes, I believe so. This is it started as a computer game that has been revived and updated, and the designer Thomas Biskup is German, and he just reached out to me, and he's working on Ultimate ADOM at the moment,
right,
and working on a pen and paper role playing game. It's sort of old school fantasy dungeon crawling, and I was invited to write something for it, and I would love to. And yes, we've I haven't really had a chance to start work on it yet, so there's not really much I can tell, and it's not my baby to spill the beans on, but it's something else that I'm very interested in giving a try to, because I love doing this sort of stuff.
No, I agree with you. It looks fascinating.
And what else do I have? Oh, yeah. You remember I did a Temple of Jing project that many other gamers did in the past?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we may go back there too. You never know.
Really?
Yeah, you never know. There's all these, because, we talk, and there's, and you remember I was involved in a computer game recently, Mages of Australia?
Yes, I do remember.
Yeah, well, who knows if that'll cook. Yeah. There's all these possibilities, and I'm not teasing and being nasty. I can't go any further than teasing, because there's many things that may not develop beyond, wouldn't it be cool if? But I mean, that's how we keep the light in each other's eyes. We have these conversations. Wouldn't it be cool if, like we're having now? And sometimes new gaming things or new novels or new something grows out of them.
Right. No, absolutely. It becomes, all the ideas when you brainstorm, you never know what's going to take seed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I have tons of stuff on my plate, and you see, I'm going to live forever, Jeff, because I can never die. Because I can't die until I've done this, and I can't die until I've done that, and I promised this person I'll do this before I die. So I will never die, because the to-do list, it's like my honey-do list gets longer and longer.
I think we need to work about transferring your consciousness into artificial intelligence right now.
A brain in a jar. Yeah.
A brain in a jar. This is Ed's brain. Come poke it for $1.
He had the body of a 21-year-old, but nobody knew where he kept it.
Oh, there you go. I love it. Well, Ed, I wanted to thank you very much for joining us again. Next time, we're going to have George Krashos with us.
Yes, Lord of the Realms. Yes,
that's
fun.
Right. That's right. Next week, we're going to be recording that. I'm not sure when it's going to come out. But we'll definitely get to talk to him about Impultor and Thay and all the places he loves to play in the sandbox.
That's great. I would like to sit back and listen to George do some heavy lifting.
There you go. You may have to spot him. You may have to spot him a little bit, but we'll get him going, right?
Okay, sure. Yeah, no problem.
But I wanted to thank you, Ed, again, and I know the fans appreciate it. So, other than the fan pages of the fan pages of Elminster, there you go. The fans of Ed Greenwood on Facebook. What is your handle on Twitter?
The Edverse.
The Edverse, that's right. At the Edverse.
Yeah.
And those are your two main medias that you're in right now, correct?
Yeah, I am not a Luddite, but I am so busy that I almost never get on social media. I sometimes miss things, but ferry me stuff from the fan page, because I'm Facebook. I get on a lot less than Twitter. I get on Twitter twice a day. I try to, very briefly. So yeah. But on the other hand, folks, if you want to send me questions, it would be really nice if they're about the realms. Not about what is Wizards going to publish for D&D next, or which character class do you think they should develop, because that's out of my hands. Send the rule stuff to Jeremy Crawford, and if you want a new Realms product, then Mike Murrell's here, because I don't work for Wizards of the Coast. I never worked for TSR either. I'm just a freelancer like all of you guys.
There you go.
So I can't create products, and I really can't have official opinions on mythical future projects. Like, oh yeah, tell us all about the D&D movie. Well, no, why don't you tell me about the D&D movie? Because I don't know,
Well, we know more than you do.
Yeah. But yeah, by all means. And thank you for having me, Jeff. I love to talk the realms, and I love to get a chance to talk about the realms in ways that will be useful to people who love the realms out there. So yeah, let's hang out more often. This is great.
Absolutely. No, I love it. I love all of our time together. No, absolutely. So
I'm so glad we had this time
together. No, we got a hug.
Yes. Well, yeah, and I will raise a tankard. Well, actually, I will raise a half-empty bottle of Diet Dr. Pepper in your direction.
There you go. And I'll raise my empty glass of bubbly.
Ah.
All right, Ed. We'll talk next week.
Okay. Yes. Let's do this.
All right. Bye, Ed.
Bye. It's a date. Bye.
It's a date. I love it.
Well, I hope everyone enjoyed that 3-part series interview with Ed. Next week, we're going to be interviewing Ed along with George Crashos, another Realms lore master. He's been dancing in Ed's sandbox for about 30 years now, and we look forward to that discussion. George has put out many pieces on Impultor, the dwarves, and recently last year he did one on the Zolkirs of Thay. I do recommend that, and I think all of his pieces are available at the DM's Guild. So please go out and check those out, and we will see you next week. Until then, keep playing in the realms.